Sabina, good morning.
Good morning. Happy belated birthday.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The Committee on General Government Operations, Appropriation, and Housing convenes this budget hearing for the Department of Revenue and Taxation. Budget hearing notices were given to the media on Monday, June 3rd and June 13th, and today is Tuesday, June 18th. The time is now 9 o'clock. This budget hearing is called to order. The committee will hear and accept testimony, both oral and written, on the following, which is the budget for the Department of Revenue and Taxation. I'd like to recognize my colleagues that have joined me this morning. To my right is Senator Sabina Perez, the Oversight Chair of the Department of Revenue and Taxation. To my left would be Senator Will Castro, the Minority Leader, and Senator Jim Moylan. The conduct of this budget hearing shall be as follows. Those testifying will be recognized in the order of sign up on the sign-in sheet, but we will begin with the director, okay? And then we will move on. Written testimony may be read. Lengthy written testimony should be summarized. Written testimony shall be submitted to the committee. Please provide our legislative staff with your written testimony for photocopying. Testimonies shall be confined to the substance. We're talking about the budget. It's not talk about any bill or anything else going on. We talk about the budget, so we're very specific. Persons will be allowed to present oral testimony, not just once. I have it here in my script as once, but you'll be able to provide testimony throughout the whole hearing, all right, by yourself or any of your staff. Once you're done, you may be asked to remain in the room for questions or for additional testimony as may be desired by members of the panel. Proper form and decorum shall be practiced by all present in the public hearing room for the proceedings. Individuals who fail to maintain proper form and decorum may be restricted from providing oral testimony and/or may be asked to leave or be escorted or removed from the office. Fair warning, anybody that's disruptive, you will not be asked, you will be escorted out, okay? When you speak, please make sure that the microphone is on and that you speak into the microphone. And please state your name when you first speak, okay? I'd like to also recognize Senator Chirlai has joined us, my colleague, Therese Chirlai. We will now begin hearing testimony, and if I'm correct, Ms. Shimizu, Director, you have a PowerPoint presentation. You want to start with that, right?
Yes, please, Senator.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so good.
Ryan, you want to get all my colleagues have gotten a copy? Okay. Ma'am.
Good morning, Senator Agustin, Chair and members of the 35th Guam Legislature. Hafa-day, and thank you for this opportunity to come before you to present the FY 2020 budget request for the Department of Revenue and Taxation. I have with me today the DRT Deputy Director, Mrs. Michelle Santos, our Deputy Tax Commissioner, Mr. Paul Pablo, and our Chief of Administration, Mr. Edmund Villanueva. Before I start, I would like to say thank you to our very hardworking DRT team, and again, I want to say thank you to you, Chair San Agustin, for giving us the opportunity to provide this testimony on our budget. So we can go ahead and start with our slideshow. We can go to the next page. So the first slide shows our mission and our goals and objectives. This is actually outlined in our budget submission already. The mission of Rev and Tax is to provide quality service to our island community by helping them to understand and meet tax and licensing responsibilities, encouraging voluntary compliance, and enhancing public confidence in our service systems through the application of laws, policies, rules, and regulations with integrity and fairness to all. Our goals and objectives, which is in line with our budget, is to increase enforcement efforts to establish and maintain public confidence in the Guam tax systems, to increase taxpayer awareness of tax law and reporting responsibilities, and achieving a high degree of voluntary compliance, to regulate business license holders, for the protection of the consumers of Guam, to improve our e-commerce options, and to provide quality services in a cost and effective and timely manner. The next slide shows our budget highlights, and we'll go into the numbers in the subsequent slides. But as a summary, for FY 2020, we are requesting for $14.8 million. This is an overall increase of approximately $3.3 million above FY 19. Some of the highlights of that, there is the $2 million of our budget, our proposed budget is planned for the real property revaluation, which is due every 5 years by law. $300,000 for an in-house tax attorney, and then $168,000 for 80 new computers, along with the other equipment that goes along with the computer workstation. In terms of headcount, we have not included new positions in our headcount, but we did include and fill in the headcount, the staffing pattern, vacant positions which are not currently filled. We also, in terms of modernization, are working to explore some opportunities for modernization in what we do. And if you'll go to the next slide, please. So this is basically our FY 2020 budget request. If you look at it, personnel is a little bit over half of what we're requesting for at $8.3 million. The next highest item on our list is contractual expenses, and that's projected to be about $4.6 million, and behind that is our office space rental, which is about $1.4 million. Total of what we're requesting for in this budget is about $14.8 million. And if you'll move to the next slide, please. In terms of personnel, as you saw, the largest piece of what we are projected to pay out and how much we've been paying out is really for personnel. We're requesting for $8.3 million, and it's broken down as follows. The largest piece of it, which is a little bit over 30%, is for tax enforcement. That's $2.6 million, and that consists of our collections branch, our examinations branch, and our criminal investigation branch. The next largest group is going to be our taxpayer services branch, and that consists of our income tax, tax accounting, central files, and electronic data processing branch. Our regulatory branch, which is basically our business license branch, and our insurance, securities, banking branch, they're projected to cost about $1.39 million. Our real property branch, which consists of both real property tax assessment and real property tax appraisal, is slated to cost about almost $800,000. And our motor vehicle branch, which is our driver's license branch primarily, our driver's license and motor vehicle registration branch is going to cost about approximately $700,000. And if we move to the next slide, please. So we do receive funding from both the general fund and from some special funds. The three funds, the three special funds which we receive funding from are the Banking and Insurance Enforcement Fund, the Better Public Service Fund, and the Tax Collection Enhancement Fund. The Banking and Insurance Enforcement Fund is funded by the banking and insurance licensing and other fees that are paid on that for that particular division. The Better Public Service Fund is paid out of, so we get a portion of the fees that we actually collect, and that's the Better Public Service Fund. And the Tax Collection Enhancement Fund is funded from the passport revenues that are generated.
Ms. Shimizu,
Yes,
before you
sir.
go on, I'd like to also recognize Senator Lee has joined us and Senator Amanda Shelton. But you identified three funds. I noticed you didn't identify anything from the compliance branch, from the collections of the ABC card. That generates maybe a good portion, a good amount
Do we have?
that's supposed to support that branch. I'm just,
As far as what our COA is saying is that has not yet been established, is that right? So that has not been established, but
DOA has not established that.
Yeah, we're currently working with DOA, with Goody, Gaudencio, Rosario, to identify all those funds so that we can capture it and establish the account.
Okay. All right. And if any of my colleagues have a question as we're moving, please don't feel free to have Ms. Shimizu pause so we don't lose our train of thought on each area. All right? Does anybody have any question at this point right now you wanted to inject? Nothing? Okay. Ms. Shimizu, please continue.
Okay, so that's I guess a summary of what is paid out of the special funds that we receive. If you'll go to the next slide, which shows the FY 2018 to FY 2020 comparative. So what we wanted to show here was our actual expenses or expenditures for FY 2018 compared with what was authorized for FY 2019 and what we're proposing for FY 2020. And I think this is a good illustration of where you will see the increases. So if you look at the graph at the top, you'll notice that for the most part, our personnel has, I guess, is about stable. There was a little bit of an increase that's projected for FY 2020 in our request. With regards to our contractual expenses, if you look at them, that red box that's in those three bars at the top, that also is about stable. And as well with our office space rental, although we did see a little bit of an increase in the authorized amount for FY 2019, it's about stable again if you look at FY 2019 and if you look at FY 2020. Where we really see that there is going to be the increase in what's really accounting for our significant increase, as I mentioned in the highlights before, is if you look at the proposed FY 2020 bar, you'll see on top of the maroon section, which is for office space rental, there's a pink section, and that's for $300,000 for an in-house attorney. And then there's a blue section, which is for the quinquennial, the real property revaluation that's required every 5 years, and that the real property tax roll and real property taxes is based on. And then right at the top, it's a hot pink or fuchsia, I guess. It's computers and equipment, which is something new, which is in line with what we're hoping to do which is basically providing the basic items that we need so that we can make sure that our people have, sufficient equipment so that they can do their jobs efficiently. And that's the FY 2018 to FY 2020 comparative. And if we move to the next slides, so what we wanted to present to Senator and to the legislative body is what opportunities for improvement that we think that we will be able to accomplish and that we're working to accomplish either through funding, through the budget, or through other areas or other opportunities, other ways, other methods. So if we look at the Office of the Director, we'll start with that. Of course, we do have several administrative division vacancies that we will want to work to fill. We also are looking at investing in training for our team in all areas and investing in technology so that we can achieve efficiencies. We are definitely working on continually improving our workplace in terms of the environment, making sure it's safe, making sure it's sufficient. We have put into place a data analytics team, which we need to work on having work on all administrative programs across the board. And we wish to work to collaborate with local and federal resources so that we can help to better execute our missions and goals. And that's in the Director's Office. In the Technical Research and Appeals Bureau, as you know, Senators, the Technical Research Bureau has been, I guess, kind of like the primary source for in-house training within our organization, but because of some challenges that we've had in our recent history, we've not been able to accomplish that. So what we've done in this last month is work to shift some people around so that we can have an additional headcount there, and our goal is to make sure that our team there is staffed at least the minimal that they need so that we can accomplish goals such as making sure that we have our in-house technical training regularly. And if we'll go to our next slide. The tax enforcement branch, again, this branch makes up the largest portion, over 30% of our personnel budget. In the tax enforcement branch, we have exams. And so in our examination branch, what our examination supervisor is tasked with is working on recruiting specialists, and of course she is also requested for increasing her capacity and working on training opportunities. In our collections branch, I'm proud to say that even though in this past few months, we really haven't had a whole lot of funding for training that our collections team has taken upon themselves to hold in-house trainings. And I'm very proud of our team for that because, you know, even absent perhaps the funding for it, you know, we recognize the need. And when we brought that to the table and we shared that we needed in-house training, we had our one of our supervisors, she got on it right away and she held training for our revenue officers. Our revenue officers haven't had IRS training maybe for about at least 5 years, if not more. And so, you know, we're working to get some IRS training. We've reached out to the IRS already. They've provided us with some potential scheduling for training, and now we're just going to have to work on trying to identify how we're going to have to pay for that. So in our collections branch, of course, you know, our goal is to increase collections and reduce our receivables. As you know, we've been referring cases to the Office of the Attorney General, some of which have resulted in complaints filed in our local courts. We also are going to continue to do that. In fact, we're expecting our next round of cases to be forwarded to the AG's office very soon. In the criminal investigation branch, of course, you know, it was and you're familiar, sir, with the FLETC training. The last time that our criminal investigation branch had the federal law enforcement training was over 20 years ago, I believe, 20 years ago. And so that's something that we're looking forward to being able to get some training for our team. And we believe that that training is going to be paramount to making sure that we have competent people. So although it's important that we hire, it's important to make sure that the people that we do have are trained so that they can do what they need to do as efficiently as possible and that they're knowledgeable on what current techniques are and things like that. So FLETC training is something that has been important. You know, our deputy director, especially, I think she was around at the time, perhaps when they had some FLETC training. So I'm fortunate to have people who are very experienced and who are familiar with that. We also, in the criminal investigation branch, as you know, we do have collaborative agreements with other agencies like the FBI and the criminal investigation branch of the IRS. So those are things that we're going to continue to do as well. If we look to the next page, so this is the Taxpayer Services branch. The Taxpayer Services branch, when you come into our office, you'll see the BPT branch, that's GRT, the Electronic Data Processing, Central Files, and Accounting branches, which you don't see because they're really in the background, and our Income Tax Assistance Processing branch. In terms of our Income Tax Assistance and Processing branches, you know, it's the first year that we are dealing with the changes due to Tax Cuts jobs. Of course, our team was able to, in I believe early March, to get the online filings done, or sorry, to get the system up and running so that people could file income tax returns online. And also, you know, on our taxpayer side, our team again is really looking forward to doing some training. On the electronic data processing side, we're really looking at exploring procedures to process taxpayer forms. And I know even at the oversight hearing in the last week and over the last week, there's been a lot of discussion about online filing. And in one item which is we had mentioned is perhaps a barrier is the issue of the convenience fee. But you know, I'm in this last couple of days as well, we've been talking in-house about perhaps looking at some informational returns, maybe returns where there's no convenience fee, and trying to see how we might be able to get those, especially if they're, like, for example, the payroll tax returns, like a SWICA. It's purely informational. There's no payment attached to it. And if we can look at that, I mean, look at if there, first of all, is there continuing to be a need for that form? And if there is there a possibility that those types of forms, which are informational returns, which again don't have any convenience fee associated with them, those are opportunities for us. So our team has already been discussing and thinking about that. As well, you know, some things we discussed, of course, we do have, and Senator Therese Chalahi brought up that we did have kiosks, and yes, we did have computers, and as I went back and I even researched and was watching some other hearings, I noticed that, you know, there was discussion with the legislature regarding those kiosks, and at one time we were utilizing them, but as I understand it, again, sometimes it's a little challenging to get to motivate people to use it, only because if I'm already at Rev and Tax, The desire to have to go to a kiosk and then to go to pay, or to go to the kiosk when I'm already there, is probably not as much because I'm already there. So we were talking about as well the possibility, and this is, although it's not in our budget, it's something that we would like to look at, is the possibility of even using tablets, or something that's a little bit less expensive. So for example, like when you go to Docomo, or you go to AT&T or Best Buy, and you go in and they have these tablets and other things that you can use to test the phone or test a tablet, and they're attached to some mechanism that if you try to take it off the mechanism, an alarm will go off, right? So because we live in I guess in a time where perhaps a full laptop or workstation isn't really necessary, and it takes up too much space. So perhaps there's opportunities for those, and those are things, again, that we have begun discussing. Okay. And if we go to the next slide, is our regulatory division. As you know very well, you're very familiar with our compliance and regulatory division, and our general licensing branch. What suggestions they had in terms of improvement is allowing foreign entities to initially register online. That's something, when I was discussing with our business license supervisor, she said, it's very difficult for those businesses to register locally because they have to get a registered agent and other things, but she had brought this idea to the table. And she also brought up that in the past, when we actually had some ability to integrate with or have maybe like DPW or other agencies that are part of the licensing branch be able to access a certain piece of our database so that the licensing piece becomes a little bit more streamlined. But we already are able to do online renewals for business licenses as long as there's no tax clearances. So, again, these are all opportunities which our team has been thinking about in terms of how we can improve. In our compliance branch, we are working on B&B enforcement. We're also right now working on enforcement at our carnival, and we, do ABC and other things. Our team is requesting as well in that area for some training. And in compliance, we, just like with regards to CIB, we do have we do work to develop like intra-agency or interagency relationships where we assist each other with regards to task forces and other enforcement efforts. In weights and measures, we're seeing actually an increase in some areas for our services for weights and measures, but we do need to, as you know, address some of our fee issues. One thing our weights and measures supervisor mentioned is, for a scale that's 0 to 30 pounds, in another jurisdiction it can cost $40, but in our jurisdiction it's like an $8 fee. So there are areas, even outside of, I guess, our budget right now, which I think can help us and help enhance what we do. And in insurance, securities, banking, of course, as with any professional license, there's a need to make sure we protect the public, and so continuing education is really at the top of what we need to be working on in insurance, securities, and banking. And then also our insurance, our ISB supervisor has as well been working on other efforts to get renewals online for certain types of industry. If we move to the next slide, which is our motor vehicle division, what's not included here is our motor carrier division, and that's because 100% of our motor carrier division is funded federally, and we get $350,000 annually for that. At least I think at this time, I believe that there was some discussion at one point that there may be an increase, but we haven't seen that yet. So it's been $350,000 annually for several years. And again, that's not included in this fund. But here we have our driver's license branch. Our driver's license branch was able to achieve compliance with the Real ID Act. We were certified compliant this year. In this year, we're tasked with working on implementing a media campaign for Real ID because the deadline for the Real ID, the deadline is October 2020 for the Real ID Act to be fully implemented. And at that time, what we've mentioned is there's going to be no discretion in terms of the the bases, or federal facilities, how the federal facilities are concerned in terms of accepting a non-real ID compliant ID.
I have a simple question in reference to the real ID. Last term, I tried to introduce a change in the law. We can talk all about the real ID that you're required to go into a federal installation, but the law doesn't even authorize you to even apply the real ID. That's all administratively. You do understand that, right? That's strictly just to be in compliance with what grant they gave Department of Revenue and Taxation, and it finally caught up. They're finally up to date. And in order to get into a military installation or any federal installation, you must have a real ID.
Yes, Senator.
But maybe I need to do is bring back that bill I had, and I'll send it to you, and I'll send a copy to the oversight chair.
Okay.
And we can take a look at that, because currently today, the law only requires that you go and fill in the application, and you say that everything you wrote on that application is true and accurate, and walk away. No additional documents. Just want to make sure you understand that.
Oh, I see.
Okay, so as administratively, you're applying the full, and you're vetting folks. You know, everybody's being in compliance with ID. The law does not require that.
Right.
And that's what I wanted to do last year, but it just didn't work. But I'll send this to you, and then we'll see how it'll work with the oversight chair on trying to get this, because the real ID is specifically to get into federal installation and to travel domestically, not to
Correct.
foreign country, just
Correct.
domestically.
Right.
Okay.
And we're one jurisdiction, which is at this time working to continue to have both a non-real ID compliant and real ID compliant. So,
I'd like to see just real ID and be done with it, you know, because it doesn't matter if you put the marking of the real ID. It's the same driver's license. That's only a simple marking, and it costs this much. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
And I'd like to also recognize Senator Taylor who has joined us. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you,
Senator
Mr.
Terai.
Chair. Just wanted to clarify, so the deadline you're talking about is not really a revenue and taxation deadline, it's just a base deadline. So for those going on base, the bases have set a deadline for them, those people. But for you, you can come in any time. It's going to be continuing, that anyone can come in throughout the year to get a real ID. Correct?
yes, right. So I believe it's actually a U.S. Homeland Security deadline.
Right.
And in fact, the requirements for the real ID they're provided for by the U.S. Homeland Security. And so
Right.
when we received certification, it was from U.S. Homeland Security.
Okay, so
Yes.
you're certified to grant these real IDs,
Yes.
but we're not, yeah.
But
The
you're-
publicizing it and all that, that's really kind of up to them. It's for those people who need to get into the bases. What about the fee? So the chair alluded that the fees are the same for a regular Guam driver's license and real,
Yes, so whether it's a renewal for a regular ID or a real compliant, real ID compliant ID, it's $25 for a renewal and $25 for a 3-year and $45 for a 5-year renewal.
I thought there was some discussion last year about the increased requirements of the real ID on your side, and whether you were going to change the fees.
And we,
As a matter of fact, before you attempt that, just to advise my colleagues that I've requested from every agency to identify all the fees that they're collecting, because we're finding out, revenue and tax is a very good example. I think if I'm correct, it's like $48.50 for one real ID card, and you're charging less than that. So that's something that once my office has gathered all the fees from all the agencies, I will introduce a bill to consider it, so that everybody can see exactly what it's costing the government of Guam to provide the service for just fees alone. It's revenue and taxes. Their fees hasn't been updated for years. It's sad, because it's costing you more to provide the service, and you get no reimbursement for anything or any sort of supplemental funds to keep you going. And that's why I know your budget is nice so far.
well, thank you, Senator, and thank you for your support. And yes, I believe the last time that the increases were put in place for our fees was around 2007, if I recall, for the most majority of our fees. And as Senator San Agustin did point out, that the cost for the actual Real ID itself, supplies and other things, is higher than the actual fee that's being charged. And so that's on the driver's license side.
Are you going to pursue changing the fees?
Yeah, so we've already done an analysis of the cost, and we've already done an analysis of our fees, and our team has already put together some proposed, what they believe are increases that are warranted. Some people looked at other jurisdictions as to determine what fees should be, and so we do have information on that already. I think we've done a pretty good job. We've done like 3 rounds of reviewing those things in-house already.
Please continue, Ms. Simmons. You still have a couple more pages, at
Yes.
least one more.
Thank you, Senator. So, and after motor vehicle, we really just have real property tax. So on the vehicle registration branch, in this next year, we plan to launch a new license plate as well, and so that's something that's we look forward to. And if we turn to the final page of our, or the second to the last page of our presentation, the real property tax division, like we mentioned, there is $2 million that is included in our request for FY 2020 for the quinquennial real property mass appraisal revaluation. The last time that was done was 2014, and it's required to be done every 5 years by law. In real property tax also, our real property tax administrator shared that, we continue to have challenges with regards to the integration of our systems with the Department of Land Management, and that was something that's important for us to work to address because, as you know, we run into that PIN issue with regards to condos, and that was something that was highly, that was put in the media a lot in the last year. What I'm grateful to say, and I think what's the most important, though, that comes out of this, and when we talk with Ms. Itoigui, who you know very well, Bennett, we talk with her, and the most important thing is, when I've asked the question, are we actually working to collect on those even if the PINs are not, if we're not integrated? And the answer is yes. So even though we do have challenges, I'm glad to say that our team has been resourceful and they've been working to collect on those taxes because that's for TEF. So even outside or even with these challenges that we faced, we continue to work to collect and to do our best to deal with what we've got. And in the last section is our real property tax assessment branch, and in that branch it's really just to continue to our efforts to assist in recording and capturing and assessing all the real property taxes on Guam, and again that's going to be very critical as we work on the quinquennial. And that completes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Simmons. I will begin on my right with the oversight chair and then head towards Senator Itoigui, and then we'll switch sides. Senator Paris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Director Daphne, last week we had an informational hearing regarding some of the challenges and some agenda that we talked about. So I'm noticing that the budget that you're presenting today is still the same budget that is currently provided to us. Is there any attempts to or efforts to supplement the budget regarding some of the needs in regards to enforcement with the Airbnbs, with tobacco stamps? Are you going to submit a supplemental budget?
Well, what we wanted to do was earlier today I was on the radio actually talking about, I guess, the issue with our rent, and I mentioned I was mentioning to our public is that we know and we understand, most especially being part of the fiscal discipline team, that part of fiscal discipline is recognizing the fact that we have finite resources. And of course, so what we were really trying to do was work within what was provided in terms of the budget amounts. If there is additional opportunities, of course, for us to be able to get funding outside of this, that would be helpful. But again, from our perspective, We want to do our best to be team players across our government. We want to do our best to make sure we work within our resources. But again, if there is opportunity for us to receive additional funding, that would be great. Something that's going to happen, hopefully in this next year, is of course we know the recreational marijuana bill was passed. Something that's not currently included here is the excise tax for medical marijuana. And so hopefully in the next year, that's something that we'll see, because we know that we don't have the technical expertise for those. And something that I'm grateful for some of the senators as well who have approached us with regards to introducing certain bills, especially when there's requirements from our enforcement team or other area, is that they've been very helpful in terms of trying to make sure that that we don't get unfunded mandates. So I know there have been bills that have been introduced to increase, like for example, some penalties, and or even to I guess there's ideas about even perhaps increasing our own fees and trying to figure out how we might be able to get additional funding in that area. But again, we did not prepare a supplemental, but of course, if there's opportunities to get additional funding, I know that our team will definitely be able to identify areas which we can utilize that funding for.
Okay, so in the news of late, there was talk about the bonded warehouse, or at least a recommendation to repeal the bonded warehouse because there's a leak in regards to collecting tobacco-related taxes. Mm-hmm. So we've been approached by one of the entities in the bonded warehouse, and there was some information that we received that the amount of taxes collected, they contribute about 80% of the taxes, yet they're only 50% of the market share. I believe that the tobacco stamps are really important to implement. I understand that training was done, and it may require initial investment to collect about $23 million worth of taxes. I think it's really critical that this budget include the amount of money that's needed to provide that infrastructure to boost the revenues. I mean, we have to plug the leaks. What are the estimates as far as implementing the infrastructure for the tobacco stamps?
I don't have those figures readily available, but I know that our team was working on something as well, even I think after last week's oversight hearing. But we can get back to you on that, Senator, with regards to the cost associated with the stamps. But I believe there was also a couple of other items which were brought forth with regards to the tobacco stamp implementation. One of them was the cost of the actual machine, and I believe addressing the issue of I guess, who would be responsible, if that was the government or it was the entity, and I think that was another item that was brought up. But we could work to get that to you, Senator. Okay.
So some of the estimates that we have found out, it's about $70,000 to $350,000, depending on the type of machine. Would your agency be willing to supplement this budget to increase the amount to provide for that infrastructure in order to plug the leaks regarding tobacco taxes?
Absolutely. If we're able to get funding for those, which I believe that the primary barrier for us not implementing the tobacco stamp tax was because it was unfunded, as I understand. And so, of course, if we're provided with funding for that, plus also, in addition to that, I think I would have to talk with our team as well about what kind of manpower may be required for that. I'm not familiar, so that's something, of course, absolutely, if those were to be funded. But again, I'm not. But that's something, again, of course, we would absolutely welcome if that's something that is a priority for the body.
So you would be submitting a supplemental budget to provide for that in this term or this cycle?
That was something that was not contemplated with regards to our FY 2020. And in fact, even when we were talking, The good thing is, thank you for the oversight hearing last week, Senator, because it also gave us opportunity. We've had several in-house meetings even talking about beyond 2020 and looking at 2021. And I know even, for example, the issue of, for example, the driver's license exams and, do we want to take those back? And but really what our team has been looking at, and I'm sorry, tobacco stamp wasn't one of them, I guess, in terms of what our, kind of what we're looking at in terms of implementing over the next, in the next few years. But we're really looking at, things that are, one, I guess, we have to look at things kind of in phases, right? At the very basic level, where we are right now is our team has computers that are probably, they were issued in 2007. So, I think at the very basic level, our focus has been just trying to make sure that we get them the basic things because it causes efficiency issues. But again, any additional funding, but we would have to look into it further, and we could always, if that is what is, I guess, priority, then we could definitely look at those to make sure that we implement such thing.
So regard to the Airbnbs, there was a recommendation to open up a hotline for that. And would your agency be willing to also include the cost for that as far as manning a hotline and the additional personnel if necessary, or retraining of current staff to man that hotline?
Thank you for, I guess, bringing that up, because the idea of a hotline, I think, is an interesting idea, which I guess, although we've talked about so many things in the last few months, I have not talked about a hotline with our team. But perhaps that type of hotline can be, so our compliance team is the team that takes care of the enforcement of Airbnbs, and we're severely, our compliance team actually takes care of several things, including our ABC licenses and, all of our regulatory enforcement. And so with regards to the B&Bs, I'm not sure that team in particular would have an individual who could be focused directly on that. But perhaps instead of having a hotline specifically for B&Bs, maybe it could be a hotline for tips of any kind, and maybe that's where we could justify having a person dedicated. Because on the B&B side, I'm not sure of the number of complaints that perhaps our hotel partners may be obtaining, but at this time, I'm not aware of any that we've received in our in-house.
Thank you. So, the line of questioning that I'm having is basically, how do we make the money that we're putting into Department of Revenue and Taxation as an investment? Because with this investment, there's going to be a huge, potentially a return on that investment. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm focusing on tobacco stamps. I'm focusing on Airbnbs, because these laws already exist. There's already processes involved, and it's just a matter of strengthening those processes. And I think with the funding you'll bring back benefits back to the agency. So I feel that this is a priority, one of the priorities for the agency, in addition to modernizing the system, making things more, filing things more electronically. I think those are critical things that we need to invest in Department of Revenue and Taxation. And it's my hope that the budget, that you guys submit a supplemental budget to address these concerns, because right now I feel that what we have right now is not sufficient to address the concerns. It's maintaining the system. It's not improving the system where you're going to see returns in that investment. So I see it more as an investment opportunity. Okay, so the other thing that I want to question is regarding the rental of that space. I understand that the renewal of the rental was last year.
Yes.
And so my concern is the space fitting the needs for the agency, and how is it that the rent increase? Is utilities part of the rent?
Yes, so power and water is inclusive of the rent. And with regards to the comment on the rent, as I mentioned, it really had more to do with just kind of looking at overall our budget and recognizing that there's finite resources, and that perhaps the increase in the rent is warranted, and the increase even in our IT service contracts may be warranted. But when those are increased, of course, again, due to the cost of living or due to other factors, then those impact us. I wasn't involved in the negotiations of the rental increase, and I don't know that I can say whether or not it's reasonable or not. Again, it's inclusive of power and water. And it is challenging because we do have a lot of people. We talked about, opportunities for, maybe even looking at a new space or a new building, and I think that that's been discussed even in prior legislatures, the possibility of having our agency have its own building and not having to rent. And I think that that's an idea that we definitely need to look into, but we do have almost 200 people, and I think what we've been really trying to focus on at this time is just making sure that our building is safe for the people that, for our customers and for our employees. But thank you for bringing up the rent.
For contractual services, what is the increase due to?
For contractual services, hold on just a second. I believe it's the 2.3 million,
Oh, it's that.
which is the 2 million for the quinquennial and the 300,000 for the in-house attorney.
That one.
Yeah. And so those were the ones that were increased, and those are about 2.3 million, and they make up actually the majority of our increase, along with the investment in equipment.
Yeah, I guess the other part is how do we reduce operating costs at the same time? So I'm just concerned about whether we're getting the most for our dollar when we contract these services out, and whether we can renegotiate some of these contracts in order to address any kind of work order changes, if that's the issue. So I think it's important to reevaluate these contracts and possibly renegotiate.
Yes, we agree. Thank you, Senator. And we'll look at that as well with regards to, I guess, our contract and the terms.
Okay, those are my questions for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Burris. Senator Lai?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you at Tax, all of you, for your efforts to step up collections and the training. I'm hoping that you're successful and that increased training will be reflected immediately in more collections. I just wanted to point out, so your appropriation in FY19 was approximately 11 million. But then in the executive budget request, it was designated 12,474,000. But this budget certification, the separate one that we received, is about 14,744,000. So it's 2 million more than the executive's budget designation for Tax. And I'm not sure how that works, right? If that means somebody else was decreased by 2 million in the executive budget.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that. I just, we've been focusing on our own Tax budget, so I couldn't answer that question.
All right. And that, so your increase is really very much status quo, except for the 2 million in contracts for the real property tax revaluation and the 300,000 in contracts for the tax attorney. And the rest of the increase, which is about about 966,000, almost $1 million, it's salaries and benefits for the exact same personnel, except for you added one FTE. That's what I could tell. Is that how you see it? So is this all increments?
So actually, the majority of it is really for vacant positions. So I believe if you will look at our staffing pattern that was provided, you'll see areas where there's vacancies. And for example, we actually don't have 3 administrators. We don't have a tax enforcement administrator. These are our high-level
But were those
managers.
funded last year?
As the way that we look at it, hold on. Admin, were they-
Okay. Yes.
They were
Ms. Simmons, Daphne,
Yes.
maybe Edmund can ask, what is this going to cost for the increments? What's the total cost for increments? And then maybe we can find where that 900,000 is at. What's the cost for increments for the department?
For FY20 is about $57,000 and
700,000.
no 57,000.
57,000 is all it's going to cost to apply increments across the board for 200 employees?
Yes.
Really?
Right, Rahim?
Or, well, approximately almost 200, by the time you're done. 57,000? Are you serious?
What is that?
So if
I think I'm going to bet that that's not right. Are you sure, Edmund, that it's going to cost you $57,000 to apply increments to all the employees?
Yes. 3,000 for the executive direction.
No, just the total. You just I need a confirmation. 57.
That's what I'm saying,
So 57 and what Senator Lai is asking, there's 900,000 difference. I think majority of the positions were all funded last year. It's just a matter of you getting the money from DOA and BMAR so you can feel it. But
Yeah, we
so-
show only one new FTE versus the FY19. Do you show more? That you're funding more FTEs than you funded in FY19?
what we're showing is that we're trying to fund some positions that are vacant. So maybe not necessarily new, but where we don't actually have a body. So we don't have a body, for example, in the tax enforcement
Right.
administrator. So it's a vacant body. So
I think we funded those last year, though.
Yeah.
Right.
So-
But, okay, so 57,000 in increments. So 900.
Let me give you a little bit of history about back in 2018, 34-42 allocated $1,400,000 to DRT to hire about 36 FTE. That's on 2018. When we started the recruitment on 2019's budget hearing, my director was asked if these positions were being filled. Of course, at the time of the submission, it's still vacant because there's no way you can fill those vacancies in 3 months. We're talking about 36 FTE.
Are you saying you didn't fill it?
We fill it as it goes. In fact, the last 5 vacancy was just filled January this year.
So they're funded. The 36 vacancies, they were funded. They've been, well,
They're
you're
funded in
working on them.
2018, but
All right.
when we reflected on our 2019 staffing pattern as vacant because the recruitment is still ongoing, former Senator B.J. Cruz eliminate all our vacancy and reduce our personal funding on 2019.
Okay.
That shows a big difference between 2019 authorized and 2020.
All
In
right.
2020, we're reflecting them. Some of them are being filled because we
All right.
went ahead and continued the recruitment.
Okay. And does this amount fund increments for 2020 and 2019?
No,
Does it
just
go
to-
back?
Just 2020
Just
only.
2020
Yes.
only? And the $2 million for the reevaluation, can you explain, is that strictly for the appraiser services?
yes, that's for the company that's going to do the.
How much did we pay in 2014? Do you remember?
Well, 2.5 million. And then she asked for an extension. Oh, sorry. Plus the extension, we pay additional 325, so about close to $3 million.
How much do you expect that this reevaluation will bring in additional revenue?
That's something that's difficult to say. Of course, the last time that it was done before 2014 was in like the 90s, so of course there was a significant increase
Yes.
at that time. But I mean, even any incremental increase would of course result in, it will have a compounding effect, right? So if it's a 1 million increase in taxes, then that's $1 million that we'll receive over time. And so again, it's difficult to tell. I'm not familiar with the market, but of course, this impacts the tax roll, which, has an impact on our debt ceiling.
Yes. Have you resolved all the appeals from the last reevaluation?
Okay, so no, we have not.
All right. So the 300,000 for the tax attorney, and you've explained in this and previous hearings that you've referred some cases to the Attorney General's office, but do you still need a tax attorney specifically in-house?
Yes, we believe that we do. And, as you know, we deal with a lot of technical, like complex tax issues that are very, again, specific. And so it's very important. I think that one main motivator for people to be in compliance is to have someone who's very knowledgeable in that area, not only in tax, because we have people who are knowledgeable in tax, but who are knowledgeable in the area, in the legal arena. And I think that that would be very helpful for us. We're appreciative of the AG and the Office of the Attorney General and their services. I will tell you, I believe that the AG himself is a great person, and I appreciate their willingness to assist us. And in the first, I think, 1 month that I was director of Rev and Tax, I probably met with him 9 times, and to me that says that really tells the importance of the collection efforts and the focus that he wanted to provide. But we have, again, very technical tax issues that, although our team understands the tax side, it's at times challenging to address the legal side of it, and so that's very helpful. We've already tried to, I guess, identify some potential people, because to find somebody who is an LLM in tax is very difficult, given our population. We're hoping that, that we've found some people who may be interested, and actually we feel confident that we found some people who may be interested, who are qualified. And again, I think this is going to help us as we work to get people in compliance, and to give our team just that much more kind of strength in terms of the legal tax side, which again is very specific.
All right. Because there were just, I think you said 6, or I can't remember the number at the last hearing, of cases that were referred to the AG's office, and that you have another round coming up where you're going to refer some. But yeah, I'm just wondering if it's going to make a big difference to get a tax attorney. And I know that for years they were unable to fill this because of what you said, the hard, we have a small population, just a few tax attorneys really specialize in tax. And but you need I know that years ago they had one in-house, but do you believe that that will increase your collections?
Yes, I believe it will. I believe that, it's very, again, helpful to provide the support to our team on the legal side. It gives us more kind of teeth as well as we work on getting people to comply. And I think that anytime there's, that level of where we are able to increase our competence across the board and our legal resources, especially our knowledge base, it's going to make us stronger as we, work to address these issues. So I absolutely believe that, if we found the right person, and we're crossing our fingers on that, because again, we've been working to try to at least identify an individual or people who may be willing to take on such position that will absolutely help our team.
All right, and this is going to be in-house FTE.
Correct.
What do you estimate to be the losses in tobacco tax?
That's something I'm not sure of. I couldn't answer that question, but I suppose we can.
The reason I'm asking is because, yes, when we discussed this tobacco stamp, there were huge estimates of potential that we are going to collect, right? If we get this stamped in place, and that we were going to to get rid of those who are dealing illegally with tobacco products. That was a big issue back then, that there are many tobacco products being sold that were not coming in or being declared at all. So I don't remember the amount. I was wondering if you have an estimate, because if it's not planned for in this budget this year, then it sounds like it's not a priority, that it maybe is not a significant number in your mind, but the numbers we were given, and the chair mentioned 23 million, so I don't know if that's the uncollected amount that we are looking for in tobacco taxes, and that sounds significant to me, and it should be a priority if that's anywhere near the amount that you can collect. I wanted to know, if we're not going to implement the stamp program that's already provided for by law, what other measures are you implementing to address that discrepancy of products being sold that are not legal or without taxes being collected on them?
Okay, so I mean, in terms of making any collection of any taxes a priority, that's something that, you know, I believe we do. I believe we make the collection of taxes a priority. And in terms of, I guess, evaluating whether or not certain industries are actually making payments, I believe that these are things that our team has addressed internally. We've been discussing, and I believe also that the public auditor is working to address as well in terms of tobacco taxes.
Who?
The public auditor.
Well, he issued a report, right? Yes, and so he says he also agrees that they are not being collected. I wish I had his report. He probably has an amount in there. Do you know?
I believe that at the time, well, based on discussions, and I know he's not here, but based on our discussions when we've met with the public auditor, I believe that what he had shared is that I believe that at the time that the tobacco stamp tax bill was being discussed, that there was a noticeable spike in the collection of taxes, right? And I think that's not any novel news to anybody. But in terms of making sure that people are complying, you know, those are things that we actively work to do. And in terms of working to collect taxes, again, those are things that are a priority on all levels.
It was reported in the news that he had suggested that Customs, the Customs Department of Customs, be the one to collect our tobacco stamp. And do they do that for you in any other area? Does Customs?
Customs is involved with us when it comes to use tax. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we do work with them on that.
So is this something that you can do immediately, like get Customs? I mean, if we're not implementing the stamp taxes, that's something that could be done immediately, just to increase the collections based on what's being brought in? Or do we have to change that whole bonding scheme, warehouse bonding?
I guess I understand it. I guess, sorry, just to try to understand your question. Your question is taxing at the point of sale or taxing at the point of entry?
Yes, or if you can increase your efforts or your work with Customs to increase tax collections in general for tobacco, mm-hmm. And he's suggesting that they actually collect the taxes, but if they're not technically able to do that, I mean, they should be technically able to at least tell you how much they're seeing come in, right? What they would have taxed if they had that authority, and that you can follow up then and really give us a very finite number of what they're finding versus what you're finding in the bonded warehouses.
Right, I thank you for that. I haven't discussed that with Director Pareto, but I will note that.
All right, and my final question, Mr. Chair, is just what are the specific goals of your data analytics team?
Okay, so our data analytics team, and I know I mentioned this a few months ago, you know, when we came into our office, it's very easy to, I think, address things anecdotally, meaning based on our gut feeling, right? We know that, you know, I guess we have been saying that we're short in terms of resources, but what we really want to begin to look at on a regular basis is really be looking at just kind of what our benchmarks are internally in terms of processing. So for example, of course, as you know, the nonprofit bingo performance audit was issued, and there was a concern because we're behind 14 months. And so the question to our team is, okay, what we're trying to resolve is how do we get, get up to speed on that? And if we're going to, then, what is it going to take in terms of manpower and even, I guess, perhaps in terms of legislation? And so, trying to identify those types of solutions is something that the data analytics team, would be involved in. Also making sure that we're, consistently monitoring, I guess, our production on all levels.
But do you have goals for them for the year, so we know whether you've met them, whether that's very effective and we should fund it more or not?
Well, at this time, really, it's working to establish a benchmark, because I don't think that there's been a data analytics team that has been developed. And I think that, one great thing that we have, I think, in terms of our resources as well, one, we have several things in terms of our data analytics team that are great. One, we have people on our team who are very knowledgeable and have been with the department for many years, and so they understand the intricacies, and those things are very specific to our agency. But the other thing is we also were able to, to bring in our chief or our economist as well. And because I tell our team, it's one thing to kind of look at our processing in terms of what we do, right here in front of us, but to think about how those can be translated into how it impacts our entire economy, which ultimately is what, I guess the question that we want to try to answer for our people, for our legislature. Those are things that we want to work to address as well. And so, those are the things that we want to answer. I know that, Senator, you have many questions as well about, TCJA and other things. And, again, we're at this time really working to establish benchmarks. And, but I do believe that our data analytics team is a great opportunity for us to work to make our operations a lot better.
Thank you, Senator July. Senator Lee, ma'am.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Daphne and team, for being here. I really want to thank you and your team, not just the ones here, but everybody over at Revenue and Tax for really stepping up your efforts to collect. And also want to ask that you continue to work to keep the wait times down, because I know that that's been a huge issue in the past. One of the things that I wanted to ask you, I sent an email to you and your team, I believe yesterday, with a draft on e-filing for monthly BPT. And so I just wanted to ask you what your current capacity is for that now, and if that will require maybe additional personnel, or if that'll help to take some of the existing personnel and redirect them into other areas. I just kind of want to get an assessment from you on that.
Okay, so, we did talk a little bit about it in the oversight hearing in the last week, and we've been discussing it in-house. Our business license supervisor, she's actually already engaged in discussions with our vendor regarding our forms, in particular the GRT form, because we believe that that's probably, in terms of, it's probably the easier one to implement at this time, because it's already being done. She has shared, though, that there are some enhancements that we do need to make in terms of the form. For example, you cannot file amendments online, and then I believe there's some other enhancements that she would like to move forward with. But in terms of capacity, I'm not familiar. Again, we did talk about last week a bit about our concerns with regards to the convenience fee, and of course working to address that. As I mentioned at that time, there was this idea about the potential or the possibility of not requiring the convenience fee online, because, it's going to be real time in our system, but requiring it if you were to walk up to, to the Treasurer Guam cashier to pay it, because there is manual work that's involved in that, right? And so that's something that we talked about earlier. I did also share about, probably as well, we always have to address the issue of individuals who may not have access to computers. And so, although, again, we did have these kiosks, they were not as successful as we had hoped. So perhaps the idea of maybe having, having these tablets or, these smaller level kiosks, which I believe would be less expensive because tablets are less expensive and easier to use so that people could, if they don't have access to technology, that they could do that. But we believe it's an absolute, it's a great idea, and we support the idea of trying to move toward that, toward mandatory online filing. Again, we just want to make sure, and I know I say this a lot, but that we dot all our I's and cross all our T's, so that once such thing is implemented, that we've, addressed those individuals again who may not be able to access, or who may not be motivated to file online because of the fee. And, like I mentioned before, when people are already in our building, there's not a whole lot of motivation for them to file online because they're there, and, they want the papers, the stamp on it. So, so those are the issues. I think as well, perhaps a large, maybe like a campaign in terms of educating people. I think that would be helpful. I haven't filed a GRT on my phone, but there are things called app wrappers, and app wrappers, basically what happens is, so if you ever go to a website, it may show you can access it using as like a regular full site, or it could be like a mobile site. And an app wrapper, if we're not capable at this time, but an app wrapper would allow for the screen to adjust so that way it takes into consideration that it's a form and that you don't have to keep scrolling back and forth or up and down. So those types of things are considerations, and I believe it's a good opportunity for us to help us to get obviously up to speed, as Senators Terlahi and Senator Perez did point out last week in oversight that again, or the public auditor's report stated that we're 14 months behind, and that's something that we don't want to continue. In fact, our goal is to make sure that we don't hit those levels anymore.
Thank you very much, Daphne. You also, in a previous question, I believe Senator Terlahi had brought up on vacancies. You mentioned that there were 3 vacancies, but you didn't get a chance to finish telling us what those were. So you mentioned tax enforcement administrator, and then that's where you left
We
off.
actually have several vacant positions at this time. We have, I believe, 3 administrator positions. We have a tax enforcement administrator position, and that person would head the tax enforcement branch, which is collections, examination, criminal investigation. Our motor carrier section does not have an administrator, and that would cover motor carrier. It will be driver's license, motor vehicle registration, motor carrier, which is Department of Transportation. We also don't have a regulatory administrator. That was vacant when Mr. Carlos retired a few years ago, and that would head the regulatory division. So, there are, positions in different areas, whether it's, at the staff level for investigators or for revenue agents or revenue officers, but there are also these higher level positions which have been vacant even prior to us, coming on board.
And those are all in recruitment? A couple of them I see listed in the budget digest as recruitment in progress?
Right. So I believe that for those positions, there was active recruitment. Unfortunately, we were not able to identify, individuals at this time to take on those positions. But those are things that of course, we're working to address, because if we're able to address having some individuals in the administrative level, it helps to take some of the work load off of our deputy tax commissioner, off of myself, and off of our deputy director as well.
Thank you. Daphne, I know this is probably the first time I'm having this conversation with you, but just for a little background, I brought up the idea of, many people have brought this up, but, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about AS400. And it's my understanding that in the Calvo administration, both Director Balatsu and Director Camacho were aware of the possibility of Department of Interior giving us grant funding to take a look at AS400 and to help us to assess a new system that might be able to replace it, because we're always, looking for new technology that might be more efficient and have a cost savings in the long run, but also to assist us in communicating with other agencies, as we know that's been an issue with DRT in the past. So I just wanted to ask if you have an update or if you've communicated with anybody from DOI in terms of if this funding is still available to us?
I have not communicated with DOI on that particular item. I know that at one point there was some, I think it's TAP grant funding for something related to our business license or permitting system, but in terms of our overall system, that's not something that I'm familiar with.
Yeah, it's kind of disappointing because the past two directors were in direct communication with DOI, and I guess it just kind of fell off their radar. I'm not sure, but maybe we can work together to try to figure out how to bring the conversation back up and see if that funding is still available to us. Because if the federal government's going to give us an opportunity to assess what our current need is and to make a recommendation in terms of how we can be much, much more efficient, I think we should absolutely take them up on that offer.
Thank you, Senator. We agree with you on that as well.
Sujos Masi. Thank you all.
Sitos Masi.
Senator Tello.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Daphne, and to the team at Rev Tax. Greatly appreciate all your hard work with the little means that you have, and that's first and foremost and important to let you know that we do appreciate it. At least I do. Greatly appreciate it. Most of the questions down the line have already been asked, but one thing that I have concerns about is the IT side of Rev Tax, which is very important. And my question is, how secure is Rev Tax with the IT system, and is there a redundant system in place to protect the data from any system breaches? I mean, I'm bringing this up because of the incident in Baltimore. It's a really big problem, and cybersecurity is a growing issue. It's already an issue, but it's even getting worse. And is there somebody actually in Rev Tax that actually keeps in touch with the OT office to ensure that? Do you have somebody that's knowledgeable in that section?
So we do have, we have at least one computer programmer 3 that is funded by Rev Tax, but falls under OTEC, and he provides technical support to us. With regards to redundancy, there is redundancy, as I understand it, because this was one of the questions also when we first met with the Office of Technology and Mr. Frank Lujan and his team that we had asked. And so we do have one set of servers at our office. There is also a set here in the Hagåtña office where OTEC is, and they serve as backups to each other. So that's great for disaster recovery, right? I guess rule of thumb is that there's off-site storage. So that, in terms of redundancy, yes, that there is redundancy. In terms of security, there is, I believe, on an annual basis, a safeguard report that has to be done or provided, I guess, by IRS. And so there are safeguards, and there are, outside of our agency, there are people who are looking as well at our system because, we do have tax data, and tax data is, of course, subject to, we are required to make sure that we comply with disclosure laws, and we need to make sure that we secure the data. Now, of course, there is always room for improvement, and those are things that we're continuously looking at, and those are things that we continue to talk with the Office of Technology regarding.
Okay, and is there any funding in your agency for this area that you need assistance in, or no, just the position itself that your expertise that is funded under the salary of Rev Tax, but any other kind of funding?
Well, I know that although it may not be in, I think, the general fund or special fund headcount, we would like to look at perhaps opportunities for us to get more, I guess, technical IT expertise as well, to look at our systems. We have several systems in-house, and I know, and we appreciate the Office of Technology and their support, but we also recognize that they have, several other agencies that, to address as well or to work with. And so that's something that we've also thought about, is the possibility of maybe having some additional in-house IT people. But of course, those are things that we would work with the Office of Technology on, as they are really the, they're the IT for our agency.
And like you mentioned, Daphne, the importance of having an attorney, in-house attorney. This is also an area that's important to have at Rev and Tax, especially with cybersecurity. So maybe next year, I know when you get more into it that you might bring that to the table for the next year budget, FY 2020 budget. And that being said, speaking of additional funding, does Rev and Tax receive any local funding from the legislature for, well, actually, let's go to federal grants. Do you receive any federal grants? And if so, have you used all these federal grants? Has any of these monies been unspent?
We receive federal monies for our motor carrier division. 100% of our motor carrier, which is the Department of Transportation, those are those individuals that you see sometimes in East Agania, pulling over the large commercial trucks and vehicles. They're 100% fully funded.
No matching? No matching?
No, they're just 100% fully funded. So the whole 100%, but it's 350,000, and those that level of funding has been in place for several years. We haven't seen an increase, although in the next week we'll be visited by the head people from Hawaii, and so those are things that we'll be discussing with them as well, because I think there was, based on my discussion with our supervisor in motor carrier, that there was some discussion about the possibility of the funding levels being increased, but that's something that hasn't happened yet, and we'll be discussing that in the next week.
And it is fully expended, for sure, right? There's no unspent.
I mean, there are some areas where I think that perhaps we wanted to try to hire some administrative support for that team. And so that's something that we'll need to look at. But in terms of, how those individuals or employees are used, because it's federal funding, we cannot mix them with other areas. So we can't pull them over to assist us in driver's license or motor vehicle. They have to be fully utilized in their area.
Okay, I'd like to know what that is later on, if they do come. When do you expecting them to come for the assessment?
So it's going to be a meet and greet. We're going to meet some people from Hawaii, and they're coming in early next week. I think they're visiting both Guam and the CNMI.
Okay, great. Also, what is the total cost of government share in the health insurance provided by DRT employees?
We don't have that readily available, so we'll have to get back to you on the government share for our employees, right?
Yes, the government share on your employees. You don't have the amount?
We don't have that amount, but we'll have our Chief of Administration provide it.
What about FY19 amount well, it's not expended all the way, but what about FY18? What was the government share in FY18? It's the health insurance,
Are you asking about the employee's contribution?
the government
No,
share.
the government across
The government, how much-
across the
yeah.
board. Oh, okay. That's normally BBMR, DOA would have that.
Sorry,
Not
we
you.
we'll have to pull that. We don't have that information,
Okay.
so we'll have our Chief of Administration will work either with BBMR or
Yeah,
DOA
that-
to try to get that information.
That's one thing, Mr. Chair, is that, each agency has a government share in their agency that we don't know of, and it's never been, explained each individual agency. So I'm trying to figure that out, and and some agencies don't know that, which is something that they should know, how much the government pays for health insurance in your department. So I appreciate, Daphne, if you can send me that information.
As a matter of fact, Ms. Simpson, you should have that in your budget. Just go to the column and just go to the bottom total, and it'll give you your total. I mean, you have the column here that talks about medical, Medicare, the whole works.
So
Total benefits.
if we go,
It should be in your,
the
it should be in
summary?
your budget. You have it in pretty much
Just a second.
every,
You have
it's
the
on every
first
staffing pattern position. I think your grand total is, let's
So
see,
from-
off the bat, benefits, medical premium, 117,000,
here, so
Medicare, 28,000.
so of course this is
It's-
just an
it's there.
estimate, right?
That's correct.
But,
It has to be because if the position's not filled yet.
Yeah, so this is just an estimate, but if you look at the agency staffing pattern for FY19 and the summary, for all employees, it looks like the medical premium is about 429,000, and the dental premiums is 33,039. So that's what we have in the, yes, as a summary for the current, for fiscal year 19. And for FY 2020, it's about the same level. It's probably about a little bit less than around $450,000 for medical and dental.
Okay. Thank you, Daphne. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And
Thank you, ma'am.
the other one was, when you mentioned, I should have brought this up when I was talking about the attorney in-house. Are they involved? Because, you know, when people who are delinquent on their taxes, whether it's taxes or property tax, a notice is sent out them. There's a process that's involved. And I think this is where your in-house attorney comes in very handy to make sure that these processes are followed correctly. So is there one in place for those who are delinquent, like in any kind of taxes that are owed to the government?
Well, we have process in place for addressing the issue of delinquent taxes. So we have, our first line on the tax side is going to be our accounting branch. The accounting branch sends out the first notices. For local tax, I believe there's only one notice, and for GTIT, there's 2 notices. And so our accounting branch sends out the notices, and that's kind of the first line. If those notices are not responded to by taxpayers, then that goes to our collection branch, and then our collection branch actively works to enforce. At that time, when our collection branch actively works to enforce, again, that's when additional letters and calls, and even now, we've ramped up our field visits. Those will happen, and we'll work to collect on those. The only time that we really refer cases is when really we've exhausted all remedies to try to get those taxpayers to come into compliance. We really, as our philosophy or how we've kind of operated is this: the first line is really to help people, and really we're here to provide a service. Although we're enforcement, we're also here, again, we really don't wish to have to, send people to the AG's office or to close their businesses. That's really the final line. And the only time that that happens, at least during our period now, is when taxpayers are really not complying. In fact, what we've done is, so we do have a process, right? There is due process, and all taxpayers are afforded that. And the only time we send them again is when there's we've exhausted all possible means of connecting with these. And we've even gone a step further. Our team has done things even in addition to what's required by law. Before we sent cases over to the AG's office, we've even implemented another process of trying to do like a one last call, and then we also advise the taxpayer by letter that their case is going to be forwarded. So we do our best to work with our taxpayers, and every time I get the chance, I want to encourage people to come in and to comply, because we're here to help. We don't want to hurt our people. We want to help them the best we can, and that's really been how we have been working to operate. It's education. Even when, for example, we went out to do B&B enforcement, the first thing that we did was educate our people. This is what we're going to do, so please be advised. And then we go out and enforce. We want to make sure people know what we're doing, and so they have the opportunity to get into compliance. And we've been encouraging people, we've actually, I'm proud of our team. They really go above and beyond. People have come in and they've asked, how do I get in compliance? I mean, our team has gone as far as, sitting with me and saying, this is an LLC and they want to, get this kind of a license, and what can we do? So, I mean, they really go above and beyond. And so I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it does very much. And I'm hoping those who are listening to here and on their TV that, Reverend Tax really does every possibility and every effort to help the people of Guam, and that they're not the bad guys. But after all this has been exhausted, then it's sent to the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General then goes after those individuals who just don't comply or respond to any of your notices. So they are utilized then, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The next question I have is, during the evaluation, the property evaluation, it's supposed to be done every 5 years, correct, Daphne?
Yes, so it used to be
Okay.
triennial, and then I guess it wasn't done for several years, I don't know, over 20
Yeah,
years.
that's my next question. There have been times in the past that this has not been done every 5 years. In fact, there was a period, it was almost 9 years before one was evaluated. Is that correct?
As I understand it, the last time that it was done prior to, just this most recent one was in the 90s.
Right, exactly. So there was some kind of delay in it. Okay. I think the staffing, just all information required by law, the bond. Okay, the last question I have, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for indulging me on this. The last question I have, this bond warehouse that a lot of people don't realize, and I didn't even realize how this worked with regards to how the taxes are paid on tobacco when it's, I guess, when it comes from the commercial port. It goes into a warehouse that's actually locked, and the only people that have the key is Department of Rev and Tax and the distributor. And that when this lock is open, that both Rev and Tax and the distributor go to the warehouse and they unlock it together. Then whatever is taken out, that's when they're taxed. Is that the process?
Correct. So how it works is, yes, there is a bonded warehouse system, and our BPT branch, which is our GRT people, they're actually tasked with working on the bond, or I guess staffing the bonded warehouse. So anytime any product is either put into the warehouse or even taken out, that our team has to, they must be there. Something that, I'm grateful for when we did ask about, or when we've been discussing internally the bonded warehouse, as our compliance supervisor has made sure that, when he became supervisor, or when he came into the ABC group, that all locks were changed. And so, there are safeguards that are in place, but you're correct, the tobacco tax itself is taxed at the time that those products are pulled out. And tobacco tax is based on number of sticks, not based on, like a sales, so based on number of sticks.
So Daphne, how was it that the tobacco taxes were not collected by a particular company for so long, and it was taken out of these warehouses but never taxed? How did that slip through?
We can't talk on any specific taxpayer. All I can talk on is really our process. I'm not sure,
Okay.
Perhaps what
hope-
transpired.
yeah.
But really what I can say is, really the the bonded warehouse is, meant to, as a safeguard. Of course, there are questions about the bonded warehouse, and I know even in the prior oversight hearing in the last week, there was questions about whether or not, that should continue to be in place, the bonded warehouse, or perhaps maybe there's another avenue for taxing. But, again, the bonded warehouse is meant to protect and meant to make sure that we don't have product that's not taxed on the streets.
I see. I'm sorry to bring that. In fact, you're right. It's an ongoing thing right now, but there is some issues. I've been approached by some other distributors who see that there's some unfairness on that process, but I'll meet with you personally on it later on to discuss the issues that I've been hearing, and we'll bring it to your attention. The last question, I'm sorry, I said it was the last question, but there was something I have here. With efforts of, if any, is DRT working on to secure a vendor to process credit card payments at a flat rate instead of a convenience fee, which is based on the payment amount? Example, GPA and GWA, when make payments are made by using credit cards, and they have a flat fee.
So the negotiations with the credit card vendors is actually, and the merchant services is really a function that is managed by the Department of Administration. So our team actually doesn't directly get involved in that, although, unless, there are other reasons why maybe we may be. But that generally is a Department of Administration, a question to be referred to Department of Administration in terms of the credit card fees.
Okay, so maybe you can look into that, talk to DOA, because, you know, this is your constituents coming to your office, and I'm pretty sure you hear a lot of complaints about it. So if GWA and GPA can do it, why not DRT? Okay?
All right,
Thank you so much.
Senator.
And again, thank you for your hard work.
Si dismasi.
And for that question, Senator Tyree, just to let you know, last year that was brought up by the OPA, that of the hundreds of millions of dollars collected when swiped by the card, the convenience fee was only costing the individuals about $2 million, and she had asked that that be considered to save the taxpayer, so that we get more folks to come in. Instead of bringing cash or using a check and then ending up being bounced, run the card and be done with it. And that was mentioned last year. Now, we're done on this side, right? Okay. Senator Amanda Shelton, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Shimazu, and to your entire team who are here and who are also back at the office for all the work you did to prepare this budget. So going off of the previous speaker, she asked about your process for delinquent taxes. I was just curious if you have any kind of reciprocal relationships with other U.S. jurisdictions to capture these delinquent taxes once a person moves off island? No.
No, we do not.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Also, last year there was a public law that was passed to require a consolidated tax collections report be given to the Speaker of the Legislature every month. And I know that we haven't received that report, and I was wondering if that's something you can provide to the legislature.
Thank you, Senator. I'm sorry. If that's a requirement and we've not provided it, our team will work on that and make sure that that gets provided.
Thank you very much. Okay, and I know you were asked earlier about the 30 positions for people to hire collectors, and can you just clarify what you said about the status of those hirings?
So our current staffing pattern really actually, it doesn't allow for additional new positions. It allows for hiring of vacant positions, which we had not filled, and that is really the majority of the increase that we're seeing in the personnel from last year to this year. Some of those are administrators. Some of those may be, I think we have also some people who have recently retired, like our income tax supervisor, our real property tax supervisor. I believe we had a revenue agent position. So altogether, I believe we had about a dozen vacant positions that we're now working to request for funding for FY 2020. Does that answer your question, Senator? But in terms of 30 head count, I'm not familiar. We actually have almost 30 people in our collections group.
Okay.
We hired two people this fiscal year, and of course we're hoping to hire additional people in the next year if possible in our revenue as revenue officers.
Okay, thank you. And then I have one more question about the ABLE accounts that were the ABLE savings program that was authorized by Public Law 34144 in the last legislature. And I just wanted to know the status of this account, if it's something that has been established or something that you're working on, and if it is something that you need resources for, if that can be included in a supplement to your budget.
I know that the ABLE account was something that was brought to our attention. We still have to discuss further in-house, and if there's additional funding required, perhaps then we may come back and share that with you.
Okay.
But we've been discussing it, again, it was brought up to our attention, so we've been just in preliminary discussions regarding the ABLE account.
Yeah, I think this is a really critical savings account that needs to be established. It's something that will help our people with disabilities and their parents who are trying to, have some stability and plan for the future. So if that's something that you can look at and include. Situs Masi.
Cesar Masi, Senator Shelton.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Daphne, for your report. Appreciate it. A few questions, really quick, and you're doing great in answering all your questions. And I didn't even notice you drank any water yet, so congratulations.
Drink after, thank you.
You must have been. Okay. A lot of folks are anxious to get their tax refund. Please tell us about how we can assist you in getting these tax refunds out quicker. And the second part of that question is, do you require a certain amount in your tax refund fund bank there before you issue out tax refunds?
So I'll go to the second question first, which is the tax refund fund. We don't manage that or monitor that. That's likely a DOA function. That's the first. With regards to the tax refunds, I actually am pretty proud of the system that we currently have. When I first started at the Rev Tax in January, we didn't really have a real system in terms of communicating to DOA, not like a consistent system. So, through the months I've worked with Director Byrne to make sure that, and I think that especially in the last month or so, you've probably seen us consistently issue media releases, consistently working to pay out, even if it's a day. I think we've been doing consistently at least one day at a time. And so that's what we've been doing. Obviously, the payments are always based on cash availability, and those are what we rely on, DOA to advise us of, so that we can know how much we can process, when we have the opportunity to process.
Okay, thank you. That's really good. And then you mentioned the B&B also, and that how well you're doing in the collection. So congratulations. Looking forward to everybody becoming legal again. I'm hoping somehow down the line we can assist you in getting, all these folks with these B&Bs and stuff. Any fines, I think, should go to DRT to help beef up your folks if your computer issues that are owed as 2007, right? So some money, I think, should be dedicated for you folks, a percentage or somehow, and that's something I'd like to work with you down the line. Yeah, and you mentioned your computer is 2007. What is that? Is that CD-ROM or floppy disk? What do you have?
Well, I know that our COA had mentioned that probably 3/4 of our computers are running on Windows Vista, and that Windows Vista was probably released back in early 2007, so which says a lot about, the state of our equipment. We also have, in our agency, a lot of people don't have UPSs, and those that do, it's kind of you don't know if your UPS works or not. I found out my UPS doesn't work. So, those are things that are very significant. And although they seem like they're very basic, I guess it shows that at the very basic level, there's some really basic foundational things that we need in order to make sure that we can do the larger things that we want to do. But I think it's first those very basic foundational things that we need to be able to provide, because even if we were to hire additional people, if we didn't have the equipment, then we would have a challenge. When we just started back in January, we actually had 3 revenue officers who didn't have phones. So, when you're working to collect and your job is, to make calls, it's difficult to do that if you have to share a phone. So some of those, again, some of those very basic needs in order to try to make sure that we're able to, have these tools to do our basic jobs. Those, I believe, are really, really important, again, in making sure, that we could do our basic jobs. Thank you, Senator.
Okay, thank you for that. Going back to the real property assessment, if I understood correctly, it hasn't taken place since in the 90s, right?
Correct. Sorry, recently, the 2014, but prior to 2014, the last triennial was done in the 90s.
So this law was, I don't know the date of that law, when they want it every 5 years.
I'm sorry, I don't know.
It's an old, several legislations ago, right?
Our team
That's
is,
fine.
yeah, I'm thinking
Yeah.
maybe 2012, because it used to be triennial, but now it's quinquennial. So we're thinking around 2012, but we're not sure.
And the purpose of the assessment will do what? What is the
Well,
purpose?
the purpose of the assessment is to, of course, determine what the role is, right? The total tax roll, and that tax roll is what determines the debt ceiling. So, as I understand it, 10% of the tax roll is what's used as a ceiling for, our bonds and other borrowings, and that's one. But of course, then there's the real property tax, payments that are reliant upon the value of the properties, and those again are all established through this process.
So basically, it's a couple of things to increase property tax, right? And the other one is to borrow more money.
Correct, but with regards to the real property tax, of course, like I mentioned earlier, it's a compounding, right? The time value of money. So, if we're able to get perhaps, I don't know, maybe $1 million increase in terms of what our real property tax is, so then that's $1 million, but then in the following year we would get that million, and then the following year we'd get that million, and then we would have the quinquennial, and hopefully, it would bump it up again. So there's what we hope is going to be associated with additional revenues in terms of, and of course we know that the real property tax is tied into the Territorial Education Fund, and so those are monies that go to education, but again, those are, again, tied into the real property tax roll.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if there was times we put off this real property tax assessment, since it would increase taxes, and of course generate some revenue, but it's basically a tax on the people. If you still kept that $2 million, let's say keep that budget of what you're looking at, and then put that $2 million instead of assessing or paying a contractor to assess our property, but rather pay what you want, which is an attorney. That's $300,000, right? And your computer's $167,000. Your office rental, $1.4 million. I just see that $2 million instead of taxing the people. If we keep you with that budget, and you put that back into what you need to do your collections, to beef up your force, because you had that increase in office rental, right? And you had to take money out from someplace. Did we not hire people? Is that what happened?
So I guess, again, what I mentioned is the comment on the rent really had to do with, the fact that even if we were to have the same level of funding from FY 17 to 18, because of the increase, that, and it wasn't only rent, I believe it was also our IT services, that those, again, require us to make some decisions about what positions or how we were able to allocate our resources. But also, anyway, but that's again what the rent discussion was on.
Was that property affected by the $1 million and more increase in property tax?
I'm sorry, I would have to check that. But real property taxes is real property tax information is public information, as I understand it. So, but I really don't know if that is part of the $1 million or over. I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you. But when we paid the office the increase, right, you had to put off hiring people? I may have read that. I'm just trying to reconfirm that.
Yeah, so actually, what was great about the oversight was that the oversight, we were able to cover a lot of different issues. We covered the issue of collections, what is our collection plan? We covered the issue of enforcement and what measures that we've taken. And I think we were able to cover a lot of great accomplishments that we've been able to achieve in even just kind of a short period of time. And then I guess on the discussion of the budget, it was just a very small discussion that kind of and it was really, again, brought up in the context of, we recognize, and even as we come to the legislative body to request for $14.8 million for FY 2020, we recognize that we do have finite resources. And, and again, in terms of, trying to work within the realm of what we're given. I can definitely say that our team will do our best. We have been doing our best to work within our means. And so, those require, and like anyone, it doesn't matter, I think, how much money someone may have. There's always a need to look at really what our budgets are. And, again, the comment on our rent really was more just, trying to illustrate that we do have finite resources, but, I can definitely say that our team will work to try to allocate those resources as best we can. On the issue of increases in rent or any other expenses, again, perhaps it's warranted. I don't know what the going market is for per square footage rental is, or what the going rate is, but I can say that what is included is, of course, it's inclusive of power and water. And I was not part of the negotiations for the rent, so I'm not sure if there was even any other alternative for us in terms of a space that we could go to, or somebody that was interested in providing us space. So yeah, but that's, I guess on the issue of rent, that was kind of the very small discussion that was part of prior week's oversight.
Okay, thank you again. I really think Department of Revenue and Taxation is, you guys should get what you really need, because you bring in the money, right? And I'm tending on the line, if we don't have to do this real property tax assessment, we give you that money instead, and you can beef up your enforcement, beef up your collections. I think you can bring in a lot more money, and you're doing a great job with what, with this short time and everything. I think this will be more helpful for you than taxing everybody again. That's something on the line I'll probably be working on. But I think with your leadership, and you get more money in there for you and stuff like that, I'm hoping to see shorter lines too, because we're all excited about paying our money to revenue tax, and I think you can do it. And if we're not staying in line that long, we'll even smile when we give you your money. Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Senator. And hopefully you could do a lot more online, so you don't even have to come in and walk in our building. Thank you.
Senator Moreland, I hope for your vote of confidence when revenue and tax budget comes up. Thank you. Senator Castro, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's actually a good segue. Director, thank you for sharing your forward-looking goals and some objectives in this presentation. But I do want to say that although I don't necessarily disagree with my colleague on reprogramming that $2 million, in the event that that provision within your budget is sustained, in the event it stays there, in whatever fashion, I think it's necessary that I at least impart my thoughts so that we can discuss it again at another time. So a lot of the discussion is focused on the use of technology, primarily from a tax enforcement perspective. But I want to encourage you to look at the same type of technology for the purposes of generating additional revenue, for the purposes of informing investment, and for the purposes of informing decision making. One or more colleagues have introduced a bill that would make digital land layers public domain. But I know, and most of your staff would know, that the data that populates the digital layer really originates from one or more GovGuam agencies, and many people, at least 5,000 users, have availed themselves to this Guam Land mobile app at one time in the prior administration. And whether it was an actual standalone app or it was an ad wrap, as you referred to, the potential for a true return on investment, and in that sense, I mean for people to actually generate money by using the data, not necessarily for purposes of enforcement, although that's a necessary part of your mission. I want to encourage you, if we should proceed with the land appraisal, to look at the opportunity to include some type of oblique imagery technology into that RFP, whomever the vendor may be. And what that type of technology does, although I'm not the expert, would give you additional advantages in terms of property assessment. So this form of technology, as you do the assessment, okay, and you would know this better than I would, I'm sure, would allow you to change the prior assessment without even actually having to be there on the ground, right? From this very high resolution photograph, if you will, of one or more buildings and spaces. In addition to that, you mentioned, Director, in your presentation, the department's goals, and maybe it's just your goal, but which would be to work with local and federal partners in terms of attaining and or supplying data that would inform GovGuam, and, to be either compliant with your tax requirements or to allow them other opportunities for enhanced revenue growth or even just for delivering a product or a service in an efficient manner. And so I appreciate that sentiment, because that Guam Land mobile app was actually a collaboration with 5 agencies using 7 to 10 different layers to include BSP, DPW, Rev and Tax, Department of Land Management. I will ask the chairman for another opportunity to have a specific discussion with your team and the CTO or other folks in the technology side of the house and the government of Guam to talk about these modernization efforts so I can understand them a bit more fully. But I do want to end with this. But before I do, I'm just not aware. Are we able to renew licenses? I'm smiling here because I was going to hold this up as an example, right? And say, ask you if you had the ability to receive driver's license renewals online and then to perhaps award them. So I don't know if we do that already.
So what we do is you actually can get online and you can schedule an appointment. And if you schedule an appointment, say it's 8 o'clock in the morning, I can almost guarantee you that Mr. Tonioka, who is our driver's license supervisor, is going to have someone call you at 8. So there's no waiting time if you do online. Currently, we only have online available at the Barrigada, but we're opening that up very soon to Agana. That's one of the initiatives that we have in place. And so, although you can't, do it all online, but once you register everything, when you come in, I will tell you it take probably between 15 to 20 minutes or less, so you can come in as long as you have your proper documentation and you have your, your document that says that you have your online, you printed out your document, you can come in, and it takes minutes.
I thank you for that. Okay, because I was going to give you a good example of the frequent traveler program where you apply and pay online and you just show up for face-to-face validation and then pick it up and walk out. On that note, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity. Director Shimizu, I want to express my appreciation for your sentiment about the need to look at the bigger picture. That in fact that what we do as a policy body with your guidance and what this executive branch does have an effect on the overall economy. Whether it's a strategy of tax and spend, whether we want to revisit tax exemptions, or whether we need to sit down and find out how all this works into the Tax Cuts Jobs Act that you referenced earlier. So thank you again for painting that broader context. I think that's an important context to take into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and we agree, and that's why, again, I think it's so important that we have in our team, our economist who has been very critical to us in all areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Castro. To my colleagues, does anybody have any other questions before I I'm just going to ask a few questions, make a few comments, then I'll close it up. None? Okay. Let me see. Ms. Shimizu, I looked at the budget. There's no overtime. I know your folks are working overtime because you're trying to kick out those tax refunds. You need to budget it, okay? Please put it in, because I know you need it.
Right, and as you are aware, also we do have the ACTC, right? There's a revolving fund, and so generally those payments for overtime have been made from that fund. But yes, thank you, because it's very important that we work to make sure that we process. I know in this year, because our, and we're looking at where I believe we may have started overtime a little bit later, and part of it was because, of course, we're always being very mindful about how much we're spending. It's very important to us that we stay within our budget, and that we, again, we believe that is imperative as we work to make sure that we are also disciplined in terms of our finances. So thank you, Senator, for as well on your advisement on that. Okay,
I guess most of my colleagues asked pretty much all the questions when it talks about real property, the assessment. I would welcome, and my colleagues have actually all signaled me, we would welcome you to submit another budget. It's not technically to replace this, but we're going to use it as a basis for my colleagues when we package the budget bill. we have an option to, when we look at your budget, how much more we can afford to go up. Not saying we can, because, my OFB folks over here are ready to signal me early and text me, don't increase their budget. They're over the governor's budget, but, I came from revenue and tax. I know your shortfalls. I know your problems you're faced with. And we need to figure out a way to help you get off the ground and actually running, not just walking and watching where you're walking, okay? We need to get you out of that building. You're paying over $1 million. You shouldn't be paying $1 million for somebody's mortgage. You should be paying for your own building. That's my belief. Not necessarily in Ghana, okay? And I know that's what the movement is in Adelup, is to move everybody to Ghana. You all cannot fit in a Ghana, okay? I know your building is about 50,000 square foot. You need approximately maybe about 80 to 90,000 square foot because you're taking up space in the back of containers when you should have been in a building. There's a lot of things that need to change, but I welcome, and I know your oversight chair would love to see a new budget. She had her information briefing last week, and that's why she was asking a lot of questions. And
Well, thank you, Senator, and I'm
work
so
on it. Let's figure out a way how to help you. Okay, that's the goal.
Thank you, and I just want to say thank you to you, Senator Augustine, and thank you to our oversight chair and to all the members of the legislative body for your continued support of our agency. I'll share with you from the time that I started, I had several senators approaching and making sure that they let me know that they're in full support of our agency and in full support of what we want to do. I also thank the governor because I know she's also and the lieutenant governor have pledged support of our agency, ensuring that we're able to accomplish our goals, which of course our number one goal when we came in was collections. And so that's really about what has been our focus. So again, we thank you all for your continued support. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to, panel them to me. Thank you.
The only thing I'll have to end is, number one, continue collecting so we can see the reports that says there's more money coming in for the government. There's no one else to testify. The fiscal year budget for Department of Revenue and Taxation is now concluded. It is now 11 o'clock. The committee will continue to receive testimonies for the next few days. Just submit that to my office or via email, senatorjoe.s.augustine@gmail.com. Since Marcy for your attendance and participating in today's hearing, and for those at home, thank you for watching. The budget hearing is now adjourned. It is now 11 o'clock. Thank you.